Ahoy! The PTR comes with new artifacts as well as important changes to existing artifacts that will actually affect how certain ones are being used or how you can get them as well. We're going to start with the new artifacts, some of which are extremely strong and some of which were not announced previously as well, so I'm not sure if they will actually make it into the patch, but we'll have a look at those, we'll talk about those, and then we'll talk about the changes to existing artifacts. So the first one we have here is Ocean's Peace. This is a new one and an extremely strong one, I think. It's an earring that comes with rejuvenation. This perk gives you 2% health, 2 stamina, and 2 mana each second. But in return, potion cooldowns are increased by 75%. This also comes with Refreshing Locked, which is a very good perk to have on your earring because most earring perks realistically aren't that good. And it comes with Healing Heart, which is whatever. I don't rate it very highly, but it's okay. We have a gem socket on that too. And our perk bucket here would allow us to get various other things, including Nimble and Regenerating, which is really the last perk you would want on them. You're not going to get 4 toast or something, but I think that's fine, considering the passive that you're getting here is extremely strong. I am concerned about this passive, I will say that, because this is 2% health alone. If we compare that to Regenerating, which is 0.52% per second, then this is 4 times Regenerating just by itself. The stamina gain is also strong, I think. I think 2 stamina isn't that much, obviously. It's not a massive amount, but since this seems to be like ticking no matter what you do, as far as I can tell from the description here, I would imagine you'd be able to hold a block and consistently get some stamina back while blocking. So I think this is very viable for tanks. Now, of course, the potion cooldown here means that potions aren't really going to be your thing with this playstyle. And that's also going to be a question for where this will be viable. Because I don't know how this will work. Potions are sometimes labeled a bit differently internally. So for example, does this affect cleansing pots? Because if it does, then it'll probably not be viable in wars. You need cleanse pots there. And if it doesn't, then it would probably be a lot more viable in wars because you don't really relying on healing pots that much there if you have a healer as a tank. So in that regard, it would be very strong. It could also potentially be strong for other roles, but for a light player, for example, I think there's less application here because you don't really benefit that much from a little bit of health all the time, whereas you benefit a lot from quickly healing up against a strong amount of burst. So pros and cons to this one, but I think it can be very strong in the right situation simply because the regeneration here is insanely high, and if you cater your build around that, I think that could be fairly toxic. So definitely some concerns with this one. I'll have to try it out on PTR a bit to see what direction it really takes. The next one is Deep Freeze. So Deep Freeze, by the way, these all have no source at the moment with some exceptions. So yeah, we don't know which one will come from yet. Deep Freeze is an Ice Gauntlet, and it has a very specific use case, and that's the only way I think that it can be balanced as well, because otherwise I think it would be a bit broken. But this will not make many Ice Gauntlet users very happy. So what this does, and what this has, is it comes with Chilling End. Frozen, rooted, or chilled enemies take 15% additional damage on both weapons. The both weapons aspect is extremely strong because it also means that you can utilize roots from other weapons, like for example from a Void Gauntlet, and utilize that as well for this particular effect. You can add a gem to this, which is good to know. And the locked perk that I think a lot of players are going to be unhappy about, or are unhappy about based on the PTR feedback I've seen so far, is Unbroken Winds. Wind Chill deals 40% more damage, and if you hit someone 6 times in a row, then they become rooted for 1 second. Now, most Ice Gauntlet players don't like Wind Chill. I think that Wind Chill is criminally underrated. Dark Cousin made a video about Wind Chill very recently where he's utilizing that, and I think that it's some really cool stuff that is possible with Wind Chill, but obviously it's not something that is there for like this standard Ice Gauntlet build that is used in most scenarios. Like usually you're gonna have like your Ice Storm, and then you set up the root, and then you probably try to hit a spike into that. Whereas you can do that with Unbroken Winds, right? Like with Wind Chill, you blow them away until you get the root, and then you do the Ice Spike, and you get exactly this 15% extra damage here. So this has a very, very clear purpose. This is a Wind Chill Ice Gauntlet in every single way. And then the second perk here, Ref Move, not bad either in my opinion. Not necessarily the best synergy with Wind Chill, but it's at least fine. But yeah, like I said, a lot of people are upset about the perk here, but I think if they put this Ice Gauntlet with this perk and the gem socket without Unbroken Wind, so you could just put like good perks on there in general. That might be a balance concern in itself. So yeah, you are somewhat restricted in what you can put on it. You can't just put any other ability perks on it or anything like that. Either you're wind chilling or you're not deep freezing, I would say. And I'm fine with that. I like those specialized weapons that are good at one thing. It's not the only one, right? We have Scorpion Sting, which is specifically with Sundering Javelin. We have the Butcher, which is specifically with Whirling Blade. I think those are generally better for the game than the ones that just make everything about the weapon better and make it deal more damage. So I don't hate it. Of course, not everyone is going to agree with that. If you are an Ice Gauntlet enjoyer and you don't like Wind Chill, then you're going to disagree strongly here. Then we have Vengeance. I wanted to talk about that again because we have the full perks now. And it's kind of going in the direction that I was thinking it might go. They are just making it a full meme thing. So you get the extra damage here, and then the perks on a Keen Beacon. Yeah, that is good in PvE, I guess. Ref Move and Enchanted. So this thing is not going to be usable for actual serious healing. I think, yeah, you can still get Blessed on it at least, but or whatever other healing perk you want. But yeah, I think, or I don't think this will have much application. Maybe people will try something with a new focus gem change and try to do like a full life staff damage build or something. Who knows? But yeah, I don't expect this to be a super popular one. Though it could be interesting to see if you could like get away with a more aggressive paladin build with this and flail somehow, but then the damage doesn't benefit you that much either. And we still don't have a specification if this is something that works across both weapons, because it's it says equipped item here, but yeah. Anyways, it's alright to bad rather at best. And then we have the Unmoved, which is completely on the opposite side of things. The Unmoved is, in my opinion, the strongest heavy artifact for many situations. Even though it has some very crappy perks on it, it has one perk that offsets all of that, and that's Unmovable. You cannot be displaced. Along with that, it has Grid Ward and Physical Aversion, so nothing exciting here at all. Grid Ward, in my opinion, is just the worst of the bunch. It doesn't even make sense with this, because if you're running Unmovable, you're likely, or less likely, I'd say, to run 300 con. So what do you do with Grid Ward? The problem with this is that it's currently apparently bugged. I haven't fully tested it yet, but people have been saying that, for example, it doesn't work against Scorpion Sting. You still get pulled. I don't know if it will work against Graph Wells. That alone will decide if this is going to be the war meta for every heavy player, I feel like, almost. Or like maybe even medium players, because you can technically put that into medium. Because if you can just immune Graphwell pulls with this, that would be absolutely insane for wars. Outside of that, in any other mode, just being stagger immune without having to run 300 con is massive, because 300 con is kind of a war thing at this point. Outside of that, you're probably not really running that. So you being able to just get the immunity from staggers without that is the massive, like the biggest possible flail counter to exist, I would say. So extremely, extremely good, and strong against many other staggers in the game as well, of course. And staggers are such a disruptive mechanic at the moment. A lot of CC revolves around staggers. It'll not make you immune to knockdowns, apparently, which I guess is fair enough. Otherwise, it would just entirely take away everything from the 300 con perk. But still, I think staggers alone often are used to set up knockdowns as well. So taking that away, completely massive. And I think for most heavy players in PvP, this will be better than Void Darkblade. I could even see use cases for this in PvE just to make mob staggers less annoying in some situations. So yeah, I think this is super, super strong. Can't say if it's going to be too strong. But like, you're probably going to put health on it. It's highest roll anyways, and it's going to be cheap because Adamant is going to get a lot cheaper because it's farmable now. So yeah, very, very good one. I'm going to quickly show you the Adamant, by the way, because just so you know, in case you weren't aware, it'll be from all of these caches now. That was an early trading tip on Patreon already, but yeah, you will be able to craft a lot of gear with health very easily. The next one is Koya's Knee Guards. Basically what this has is 33% physical aversion. That's it. So it's just incoming ranged physical attacks that are reduced by 33%, which is conceptually the same as physical aversion here with 4.5%, but to a much larger degree. Now, I think this is actually not bad. If you are someone who gets focused a lot in light, and your problem is not getting like melee focused, because in that case you probably go with a Quickdraw gloves, which we'll talk about a little bit later, then this could be very useful. Like if you're, for example, a healer, I think this could be very, very useful, depending on what you're most threatened by, basically, because you can reduce all of the physical incoming range damage with this very significantly, and along with that, you can then run gear that mostly has elemental aversion to reduce the elemental incoming damage, or you can run Enchanted Ward and just reduce the base damage of everything else very significantly as well, and reduce the physical damage further. I think there are definitely use cases for this. I think mainly with elemental aversion on the rest of your gear, because it's such a high value. That is really what makes it, that it's so much that you don't need physical aversion on any other piece at all. You probably don't need any Enchanted Ward against physical range attacks, specifically physical basic attacks. So it cuts out a lot of the potential damage that can hit you, and you just kind of purely worry about elemental damage at that point. So you just put you can probably even like re-gem correctly with that. Like you can do elemental aversion, and then you can do less physical gems, unless you're assuming you're getting hit by a lot of physical melee, and do more elemental gems instead or something. Run a fire protection amulet, because that's mainly the ranged damage that's going to hit you. That's elemental, and you're going to have a very balanced defensive profile. I can't say for sure how this will compare to Featherweight just yet, because Featherweight obviously gives you the option to run more armor, which also has mitigation, but I'm fairly certain that this value will likely overall have more impact in most PvP scenarios. So I think this is probably going to be fairly good. Boltcaster we've already talked about. I'm going to keep this brief. I expected this to not have the best perks. That is going to be the case. It has Enchanted, which is still pretty good on the roll, but then it has Tricking Lightning, which is not that good. But then you can still log a third perk, so it's far from awful as well. It has that elemental damage conversion, which I think is extremely strong. It has Bolt, which is the stun against targets with full health. It is only 0.5 seconds, but that's enough to set up your next shot, and this does not seem to have an internal cooldown at all. As far as I can tell, unless there is an internal cooldown, it's not written here. As long as someone is healing back to full quickly, you can just stun them again over and over, which I think will be a problem. Again, the bigger problem I think will be the elemental conversion here. But it is kind of offset by some of the new gear we're getting. I'll talk about that in a separate video. They'll at least somewhat counter this to some degree for some players. Next we have the winged leather shoes. These come with Speedy, increasing the base duration of hastes by 50%, and then it has Refreshing and Freedom. I mean, good perks, Refreshing and Freedom, decent perks, but this perk seems completely underwhelming. Any haste increase that I've ever used, I kind of forgot that I even have it because it's not very impactful. This is going to be the same. They said something about you move faster with these shoes, and you also had something else with it, like it reduces cooldowns when they were talking about it first, or rather when they were writing about it first on the blog post. Not seeing any of that here. This is just a haste increase, which I don't see any significant value for. So yeah, I think these are just fairly bad compared to everything else, really. Kind of like the wizard had. I don't think anyone will actually end up using these, because if they had a base movement speed increase or something, that would have made a difference. But as it stands, and that's what it sounded like, but as it stands, it's just very minor. Probably got nerfed before they even got it to PTR. Mastermind is a very interesting ring that I think could definitely affect certain builds a lot. This comes with Expert. Skills deal 13% more damage, but basic attacks deal 25% less damage. I would say that for certain builds this is going to be worth it. The first thing that comes to mind here, for example, is the Blood Rapier build, because you are going to deal a lot more damage with pretty much everything, especially because your skills also affect your bleed damage. So if you have more damage on those, then the bleed damage does more damage, and so on. Rapier Guide is still coming. I'm delaying it a little bit for PTR, so you'll know more about that soon. Refreshing is not the ideal perk to have here because it kind of restricts you, especially for Blood Rapier, but it's still good perk overall. And Hardy is of course very, very good. And then in terms of the last perk, so on a rapier you'd have to like decide between either going for thrust damage or for bloodletting, for example. And obviously this is gonna be massive for various other builds as well, for various ability focus builds, fire staff builds, flamethrower builds especially. You can combine that with something that we're getting to later, or just any normal ability based builds, any cooldown focus builds like Void Gauntlet builds. So many builds that are going to be effectively using this. Some that obviously do less so because they do a lot of their damage with basic attacks as well. But yeah, I think this is going to be very strong and very interesting where it can be best used. But again, you have Refreshing locked. So for example, you can't get Invigorated Punishment and a damaging perk on this. So it will have limitations in that regard too. We'll see how exactly that plays out. Invigorating Punishment, probably a good all-rounder to put onto this, since it would mean you can use it for different loadouts, but then you can't use it in PvE, so you're going to make that decision. The Gladiator, we've already talked about as well. I just wanted to quickly show you the perks. Again, I think this is terrible. And the lock perk here is Keenly Empowered, so the last perk is the random perk. I think they had Keen on there, or Vicious. But yeah, you can choose the last perk from this perk bucket here, and you can see there is Keen, Vicious, and Enchanted in there as well. So, that's, in my opinion, just not good. Quickdraw Gloves, we also talked about already. Perks on here are good. Refreshing is good. Freedom is good. And I think this perk could be extremely strong, though it is competing now with the Koya knee guards, which I think could also be extremely strong for certain situations. But if you're primarily getting focused by melees, if you're primarily playing arenas, this is going to be very strong, I think, from what I can tell so far. I'll have to test it a bit more. And this is, by the way, a Season Pass reward. This is actually showing up as level 100 on the Season Pass here. And as far as I can tell so far, there are no changes to Season Pass and how it's awarded. Nimble Coat is one that already existed beforehand, but I want to show you something important here, and that is the PvP track. This is now 20. So every single PvP track reward item is now got level 20. You get the same on Yielding, you get the same on Pestilence, which also means that if you're, say, like, you're just above level 50 right now and you want to farm Pestilence quickly, or you want to farm Ankh quickly, you're probably better off doing it now, because in the future it's going to be competing with these other artifacts. And also if you're farming arenas, assuming the XP nerf goes through, you want to do it now anyways. But there's something else about Pestilence that I wanted to show you, which is the Blighted Enchantment. This is now specified as applying on both of your weapons. So it's now confirmed that this is intentional, and this was not a bug. Kind of same way this is on Life Taker as well, where it says this works on both weapons, and now you can see here as well, attacks from both weapons. So this will stay. Ankh is one that gets another nerf. I just wanted to quickly show you that it's specified in here now that consumables, lifesteal, and outgoing heals are reduced, but all other healing is stronger. So let's just say it in the passive now. And last but not least, there's a very under the radar change here, I would say, which is to Inferno. So Inferno currently has conversion to strike damage. That is going away. They already said that. So now it's just going to be fire damage, even if you run it with strength, but then it scales with strength, but still deals fire damage. But there is no empowering Incinerate on it anymore, and instead there is Keenly Empowered now, which is a lot better as an all-rounder for Fire Staff, and Incinerate is kind of a niche skill that not a lot of people like using. I guess it's kind of similar to the Ice Gun in a way, but in this case it opens up a lot, because you can now run this as a Fire Staff, like as a proper Fire Staff, with a Flamethrower build, like with Keenly Empowered, Vicious, and then whatever spell perk you want, or Keen. And then you can just get the extra damage from being close to enemies in a Flamethrower build, right? You have this perk instead of a gem, essentially, which is a very cheap and easy way, if you get Inferno, to get good damage out of a Flamethrower build without having to invest into a Biscraft otherwise. Likewise, obviously, this allows for a lot more interesting playstarts, combining this with other weapons, with melee builds, and whatnot, because you're just not limited by Incinerate. Instead, you get a very, very strong perk on this. So I think this will overall increase the usability and viability of Inferno a lot, even though they are taking away the strike damage. But since the strike damage scaling was never really working properly and it didn't have a gem slot, it was kind of weak before. And anyways, even with strike, fire was even then probably better in comparison. So yeah, Inferno actually useful in some ways. That is not all though. This is just the artifact. So this is just one side of the story here, and there are a bunch of other changes to gear that are separate from this that I also want to talk about. So if you're interested in that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. That video is probably coming later today or tomorrow. If you'd like to support me further, you can do so on Patreon and get early trading tips in return, for example, from this PTR as well. Thanks to all of my patrons who already do exactly that, and thank you for watching. Duke Sloth, out.